My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 38 years old. I teach third grade in Greenville, South Carolina. And 11 days ago, I buried my father without ever getting to tell him I loved him one last time, because the woman he married 4 years ago made sure I never got the chance. For 6 weeks while my dad was dying, I called that hospital every single day. I drove there twice. Both times I was turned away at the front desk. My calls to his room went nowhere. Every message I sent through every channel I had disappeared into silence. And every time I reached out to my stepmother, she told me the same thing, that my father didn't want to see me, that he needed quiet, that I was upsetting him. I believed her. I spent the last 6 weeks of my father's life believing her. 3 days after the funeral, a nurse named Angela found my number in a file my father had left at the nursing station. She called me on her day off. What she told me in that phone call and what she handed me when I drove back to that hospital changed everything I thought I understood about what had happened to us. And what I did about it is currently unfolding in a courthouse in Greenville County. Some family betrayals take years to figure out. This one left a paper trail. Welcome back to Revenge Cold Stories. Drop your first name and your city in the comments. I read every one. And subscribe before we go further, because the detail that matters most in this story comes near the end and you don't want to miss it when it lands. Now let me take you back to who my father was before any of this. Thomas Mitchell spent 40 years building bridges, not metaphorically, literally. Civil engineer, retired at 63, the kind of man who spent his career calculating load tolerances and stress points, figuring out exactly how much weight a structure could hold and where it would fail if someone got the measurements wrong. He was precise the way people are precise when precision has consequences. When I was growing up, he used to say there were 2 kinds of mistakes, the kind you catch on paper and the kind you find out about after the bridge goes down. He raised me alone after my mom passed when I was 11. He was not the type to talk about feelings the way some dads do. He showed up instead. Every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every Sunday call that ran exactly 40 minutes because he had a thing about not wasting people's time, and 40 minutes was enough to say what actually mattered. He had one phrase he used whenever I was learning something hard. Find the load-bearing wall, kiddo. Everything else is decoration. I use it with my third graders now. I've never told them where it came from. He gave me his mechanical pencil when I graduated college, the kind engineers use. Weighted, precise, the lead so fine it makes a line exactly as wide as you intend and not a hair wider. He told me it was more honest than a regular pencil, that the line it made was always exactly what you meant. I've carried it in my school bag for 12 years. Never switched the lead brand, never thought to. That pencil and that phrase are the 2 things I had left of him by the time I buried him. I held the pencil in my coat pocket through the entire funeral service because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. Diane Weller married my dad 4 years ago. He'd been alone for a long time, almost 20 years, and she was warm and attentive in the way that reads as genuine when you want it to be. I had concerns early on, small things, the way she managed information about his health, the way she positioned herself between him and the rest of us without ever doing anything you could point to directly. I told myself I was being uncharitable, that I needed to give her a fair shot, that my dad was a grown man who'd spent 40 years making sound structural decisions and he'd chosen her. What I understand now, and what I want to be honest about because this is important, is that I was being managed. Diane is not stupid. She's strategic in the specific way of someone who has decided that her investment in a situation entitles her to control it. She spent 4 years being the one who handled Thomas's appointments, managed his medications, communicated his condition to people. She built herself into the single point of contact between my dad and the rest of the world. And by the time his illness moved into its final stage, that structure was so complete that removing her from the middle of it looked, to everyone, including my dad, like disruption rather than what it actually was. Access. What she had built was a mechanism for controlling access, and she had done it so gradually, over 4 years, that nobody could point to the moment it happened. My dad's oldest friend, Gerald, knew Thomas for 40 years. He also stopped being able to reach him in those last 6 weeks. I didn't know that until after the funeral. Diane had been busy. 6 weeks before my dad died, I called on a Sunday. Our regular call, 40 minutes, the one we'd had every week since I left for college. Diane answered. This had happened before. Dad napping, Dad in a treatment session. Usually she'd pass along a message and he'd call back within a few hours. This time her voice was different, careful in the way that tells you someone has thought about what they're going to say before they pick up the phone. She told me Thomas needed things to stay calm, that the doctors had advised cutting back on outside contact for a while, that he loved me but he needed quiet, and he'd reach out when he was feeling up to it. I asked to speak to him for just a minute. She said he was sleeping. I asked her to have him call me when he woke up. He never called. The next Sunday she answered again. Same message, more settled into itself. Thomas was having a difficult stretch. Minimal outside contact was what the doctors wanted. I shouldn't call the room directly because it woke him. I sat with that phone in my hand after we hung up and felt something I couldn't name yet. My dad had spent 40 years teaching me to find the load-bearing wall before I trusted a structure with real weight. Something about this structure didn't feel right. I opened the Notes app on my phone and typed the date, the time, and what she had said, word for word. I didn't have a plan. It was just instinct. The same instinct that makes you write down a measurement twice when something feels off. I kept the note. I kept adding to it. 2 weeks later, I drove 3 hours to that hospital. I went to the nursing station and said I was Thomas Mitchell's daughter and I'd like to see him. The nurse checked something on her screen, then looked up with the expression of a person who has been placed between two uncomfortable things. She said the visitor list had been updated and asked if I was listed under a different name. I asked to see the list. She couldn't show it to me, patient privacy, which I understood, but the phrase visitor list has been updated told me everything the privacy rules wouldn't let her say directly. My name wasn't missing by accident. It had been removed. There's a difference. I asked whether someone could check with my father about whether he wanted to see me. She said any changes to visitor access would need to go through the patient's primary contact, which was listed as Diane Mitchell. I asked for a hospital administrator. I was told that all communications went through the patient's designated healthcare proxy, also Diane Mitchell. I stood in that lobby for a while. I took out the mechanical pencil and wrote the date and time and the exact words, visitor list has been updated, in my notes. Then I took a photo of the lobby, time-stamped, because I didn't know why I was doing it, but I did it. I drove 3 hours home without seeing my dad. That drive is one of the things I've been trying to put down ever since. 10 days later, I sent Diane a text. Careful. No accusation in it. I told her I was worried about my dad, that I hadn't been able to reach him in 3 weeks, and that even a few minutes on the phone would help if he was up for it. Her response came 40 minutes later. She said she'd talked to Thomas, that he'd made it clear he didn't want visitors or calls, that he found them upsetting, that she had to respect what he wanted, that he was her husband and she was doing what he had asked. He is my husband. That sentence, the way it was used, not as a statement of love, but as an argument for authority, as the reason Sarah Mitchell did not get to hear her father's voice. I screenshotted it and added it to the notes. By this point, I had 12 entries across 3 weeks. I didn't know yet what they were for. I just kept adding to them the way my dad kept adding to his engineering notebooks. Not because you know you'll need it, but because a careful person writes things down. 10 days after that text, my dad died. I found out from an aunt, who found out from a cousin, who got a message from Diane. My phone had no missed calls from Diane, no voicemail, no text. She did not call me. The funeral was a Tuesday. Diane handled every detail, the service, the readings, the music. I sat in the 3rd row. The first 2 rows were for Diane's family and a handful of my dad's old colleagues. I was not asked to speak. Nobody asked. Diane cried the way people cry when they know they're being watched and want to do it correctly. She spoke about Thomas's final weeks with the authority of a woman who was there for all of them, which she was, because she made sure I wasn't. I held the mechanical pencil in my coat pocket through the whole service, and I didn't say a word. At the reception afterward, I heard her tell someone that Thomas had been very specific about wanting things to stay calm at the end, that he was a private man who didn't want a lot of fuss. I wrote down, "didn't want a lot of fuss" in my notes. I stayed 2 hours and then drove home. I sat in my driveway with the car still running for a while. Then I cried for a long time, not just for losing him, but for not knowing what his last weeks actually looked like, not knowing if he looked for me, not knowing if he wondered why I never came. That not knowing is its own kind of grief, separate from the loss. Heavier in some ways, because it has no bottom. 3 days later, Angela called. I didn't know her number. I almost didn't pick up. I picked up, and what she said in the first 30 seconds reframed every single thing that had happened over the previous 6 weeks. My dad hadn't stopped asking for me. He had asked every day. Angela's voice on the phone was careful, the way people are careful when they're doing something that matters and they want to get it right. She told me she was calling on her own time, that nothing about the call was official hospital business, that she was doing it because Thomas Mitchell had asked her to, and because she believed it was the right thing, and those 2 reasons were enough for her. She had worked the palliative care floor for 11 years. She knew the difference between a family that was absent and a family that had been made to look absent. She'd seen both. My dad, in his last 2 weeks, had figured out something was wrong. He couldn't reach me. His calls to my number weren't connecting, which Diane had arranged. When he asked about me, he was told I'd been notified of his condition and was having a hard time coming. He understood that to mean I was struggling with his illness. Not that there was a wall between us. He was 67 years old and dying, and the woman managing every aspect of his information had built a story around my silence that he had no way to see past, because she was the only window he had. But he was an engineer. He kept looking for the load-bearing wall even when he was sick. And in those final 2 weeks, he found it. In the way Diane managed the room whenever my name came up, in a conversation he overheard that he wasn't supposed to be awake for. He couldn't get to me through the direct path, so he did what engineers do when the direct path is blocked. He found the alternative load path, Angela. He asked her to hold on to something at the nursing station, a sealed envelope with my name written on the front, his handwriting, the mechanical pencil kind, fine and precise, exactly as wide as intended. She kept it for 11 days. She drove in on her day off to get it from the station and hand it to me herself. I told her I'd come to the hospital that afternoon. She said she'd be there. I sat in my car for a few minutes before I went in. I'd driven that same route 3 times in 6 weeks, twice to be turned away, once for the funeral. This time nobody was going to stop me at a desk or ask me to go through a proxy. Angela met me in the lobby wearing her own clothes, not her scrubs. She'd brought the envelope in her bag. She handed it to me, and we stood there for a moment. I thanked her. She said she hoped it helped. Then she said the thing I've thought about almost every day since. She said my father had talked about me, that in the weeks before he died, he talked about my 3rd graders, the things I'd told him they said and did, the projects I was working on with them, that he carried a photograph from a class newsletter I'd mailed him 2 years earlier, that the photograph was still on his nightstand the day he died. I thanked her again because there was nothing else big enough to say in a hospital lobby. I drove to a parking lot around the corner and opened the envelope there. 2 things inside. The first was a letter, 3 pages, his handwriting throughout, the same handwriting that had been on birthday cards and utility bills and engineering notebooks my whole life, compressed and precise and meaning exactly what it said. He wrote the way he talked, no decoration, load-bearing wall first. He told me he loved me. He said it simply, the way he said everything that actually mattered to him, once directly, without repeating it as if repetition would make it more true. He said he was sorry he hadn't been able to reach me, that he didn't fully understand what had happened, but that he knew something had because I would not have stayed away by choice. He knew me well enough for that. He said, and this is the line I've read so many times in the past few weeks that I have it memorized the way I have multiplication tables memorized. He asked for me every day. He wrote it in one short sentence and underlined it once, the way he underlined things in his notebooks when they were the number that mattered. I asked for you every day. I want you to know that. He told me where to look, And then he told me to find a lawyer and asked the lawyer to help me find the load-bearing wall. The second thing in the envelope was a document, a copy of an updated will, dated 6 weeks before his death, the same week as the first blocked Sunday call, the same week Diane started answering his phone. This will, which I had never seen, redistributed his estate significantly. My share reduced, Diane's substantially increased, signed by Thomas Mitchell's, on a date that now had a specific and documented meaning. He'd been furious when he signed it. The letter made that clear. He'd been told I wasn't coming, that I knew he was sick and wasn't making time. His grief and his anger about that had been the conditions under which he signed a document that benefited the person who had manufactured those conditions. He wrote that he didn't know if it was legally valid or right, that he'd been angry and might have been wrong about what he was angry at. He wanted me to have the copy because he wanted me to be able to ask questions about it. Find the load-bearing wall, Sarah. Same phrase. Last line of the letter. I sat in that parking lot for 40 minutes. I did not cry. I did the thing he raised me to do, which was read the measurement twice and make sure I understood what I was looking at before I decided what to do with it. What I was looking at was this. Diane had removed my name from the hospital visitor list, a change that would be logged with a timestamp and the name of whoever requested it. She had intercepted communications between my father and me, something documented in my notes across 12 weeks of dated entries. She had told my father that I wasn't coming when I was trying every day to reach him, a lie that produced a specific emotional state in him, and that emotional state was the context in which he signed a document that gave her more of his estate. My dad figured out enough of it to leave evidence with a third party. The envelope, the letter, the document, all of it sitting at a nursing station for 11 days, waiting for Angela to call me. He couldn't fix what had happened. But he'd left me everything I needed to understand it. That was the most Thomas Mitchell thing he could possibly have done. He didn't waste the time he had left on feelings. He spent it leaving a paper trail. I drove home and I called an attorney the next morning. I called 3 before I found the right one. The first 2 were fine, but they specialized in standard estate disputes, and what I was describing had layers that went past a straightforward will contest. The third attorney, Patricia Hayward, recommended by a colleague whose mother had gone through something similar, listened to me without interrupting for 20 minutes. When I finished, she asked one question. Do you still have the notes you've been keeping? Dates, times, exact words? I told her yes, 12 weeks of them. She said, keep everything, don't delete anything, and don't contact Diane again until we've talked. I drove to Patricia's office that Thursday with my phone, a printout of every note, the screenshots of Diane's texts, the photos I'd taken of the hospital lobby, the letter from my dad, and the will document from the envelope. I spread it across her conference table in the order it happened. Patricia read through everything. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said this was one of the more complete records she'd seen from someone who wasn't a professional documenter. I told her my dad taught me that a measurement you don't write down is just a feeling. She said she was going to enjoy working with me. While Patricia was building the legal strategy, I did the things I could do on my own. I called the hospital's patient rights department, not the nursing station, the actual patient advocacy office, and asked about the process for visitor list modifications, whether there was a record of when changes were made and by whom. The advocate I spoke with said those changes were logged with timestamps and the name of whoever requested them. She said the patient was deceased, which complicated standard records requests, but she suggested I work through an attorney for formal access. Patricia handled that request the following week. The hospital records confirmed what I already knew from the experience of being turned away at the desk. The visitor list had been modified. The date of the modification aligned exactly with the week of the first blocked Sunday call. The same week the envelope letter was dated, the same week Diane started answering my dad's phone. I also called Gerald, Thomas's oldest friend, 4 decades of knowing each other, and Gerald had also been cut off in those final 6 weeks. He didn't realize I had been too until I told him. He was quiet for a moment on the phone, and then he said something that mattered. He said my father talked about me every single time they'd seen each other before the hospital stay, that he showed people photographs, that he was proud in the specific way quiet men are proud, not announcing it, just carrying it visibly to anyone paying attention. He said whatever Diane had told my dad about why I hadn't come, his voice got careful here. Whatever she had said, she was wrong. I asked if he'd be willing to speak with my attorney. He said, "Tell me where to go and when." He didn't hesitate. I added him to the notes. There's something I want to say here about documentation because it's the thing that made this possible, and it's worth understanding clearly. I didn't start keeping notes because I suspected Diane of something specific. I started keeping notes because something felt structurally wrong, and my dad had spent 40 years teaching me that when something feels wrong, you measure it before you trust it. Most people don't document things like this, not because they're careless, but because it feels paranoid or accusatory or like you're preparing for a fight you don't want. I get that. I felt all of those things while I was doing it, but here's what the notes actually were. A dated, time-stamped record of exactly what was said, by whom, on what date, in what context. No interpretation added, just the measurement, the way a good engineer records a stress reading without editorializing about what it means. That record became evidence in a legal proceeding, not because I planned it that way, because I wrote things down when they happened. If you're ever in a situation where something feels structurally wrong, whether it's a family member's care, a financial arrangement, a workplace dynamic, anything, write it down, date it, use the exact words. Don't add your interpretation of what it means. Just record what was said and when. You may never need it, but if you do, you'll have it. And having it is the difference between telling someone your story and being able to prove it. The weeks between Angela's call and Patricia's first filing were the strangest weeks of my life. I went to school every morning. I taught phonics and long division and read Charlotte's Web out loud to 22 8-year-olds who needed me present and consistent, and I managed to be both of those things because my dad raised me to finish what I started. I kept the mechanical pencil in my bag every day. I'd take it out sometimes when I had a few minutes between things, at lunch, in the parking lot after school, and just hold it, not doing anything with it, just feeling the weight of it, 2 minutes behind and steady as a heartbeat. That's what April said about her grandfather's watch in A Different Story. My dad's pencil wasn't 2 minutes behind anything. It was exactly precise, but the comfort was the same. Something familiar that meant the person you'd lost was still present in some form, still handing you tools, still teaching you the thing you needed to know for exactly this moment. He gave it to me because it wrote honestly, because the line it made was always exactly what you intended. He spent his last 2 weeks making sure the line he left was honest too. I read his letter again one night, the third or fourth time by then, and stopped at the part where he wrote about asking for me every day. I thought about what it cost him to spend his last weeks believing I wasn't coming, what Diane had taken from both of us by building that belief in him. And I thought about something my dad used to say about structures built on false measurements. They hold until the load is applied, and then they fail exactly as fast as the false measurement predicted they would. Diane had built something. It had held for 6 weeks, and then Angela made a phone call on her day off. Patricia called me on a Tuesday afternoon to tell me she was ready to file. I asked what we were filing. She said 3 things: a will contest, an elder abuse complaint with the state, and a formal patient rights complaint with the hospital. I asked if she thought it was enough. She said she thought it was just the beginning. I picked up the mechanical pencil and added the date and time to my notes, exactly as wide as intended, not a hair wider. Patricia filed on a Thursday morning. 3 separate actions, each targeting a different dimension of what Diane had done, each building on the same documented foundation. My notes, the screenshots, the hospital records, Angela's account, Gerald's account, and my father's letter. The will contest went first. In South Carolina, a will can be challenged on grounds of undue influence, and what undue influence actually means in legal terms is more specific and more provable than most people realize. It is not simply that someone pressured a dying person. It is that the person who benefited from the change had the means, the opportunity, and the motive to create the conditions under which the change was made, the isolation, the intercepted communications, the false narrative about why I wasn't coming, The timing of the will change. Same week as the first blocked Sunday call, same week as the visitor list modification, same week my dad's letter was written. Patricia laid all of it out in the filing the way my dad laid out a load calculation. Every number in sequence, every stress point identified, nothing assumed. The second filing went to the South Carolina Department of Social Services Adult Protective Services Division, a formal elder abuse complaint. The legal definition of psychological elder abuse in South Carolina includes deliberately isolating a vulnerable adult from family members, and the legal definition of financial exploitation includes using that isolation to facilitate changes to financial documents that benefit the person doing the isolating. Diane had done both, with documentation. An APS complaint is not a lawsuit. It is a formal government investigation. That means investigators who answer to the state, not to either party, not to a judge who can be swayed by a skilled attorney telling a sympathetic story. Investigators who interview everyone involved with the specific job of determining what actually happened. The third filing went to the hospital. A patient rights complaint formally submitted documenting that the visitor list of a patient, my father, had been modified without that patient's informed consent, that the modification had been made by his healthcare proxy in a way that contradicted his actual wishes as documented in his own letter, and that this modification had been used to prevent a family member from exercising her right to visit. Patricia submitted all three on the same morning. She sent Diane's attorney a courtesy notification that same afternoon. Diane's attorney called Patricia back within 2 hours. Patricia told me about that call that evening. She said the speed of the callback was itself informative. People who have done nothing wrong don't keep an attorney on speed dial for situations exactly like this one. The elder abuse investigation moved fastest. Within 10 days of the filing, an APS investigator named Marcus Webb contacted me for an initial interview. He was methodical and fair in the way of someone who has done this work long enough to know that both sides of a story are usually a mix of truth and self-protection, and his job is to find the structure underneath both. I gave him everything: the notes, the screenshots, the hospital records Patricia had obtained, my dad's letter, the copy of the updated will. He interviewed Gerald the following week. Then Angela, who was, as Patricia had assured me, in no legal jeopardy for what she'd done. She had followed hospital protocol for patient-directed communications and acted entirely within appropriate bounds. She'd kept the envelope at a nursing station with a patient's name on it and called the named recipient after the patient's death. That's not a violation of anything. That's a nurse doing her job with integrity. Marcus interviewed Diane too. I wasn't there. I don't know exactly what she said. What I know is what Patricia told me afterward, that Diane's account contained several claims that were directly contradicted by the hospital's own time-stamped records, and that investigators tend to notice that kind of thing. The APS process takes time. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect these things to move faster than they do. The investigation ran for about 3 months before Marcus's office produced a formal finding. I'll get to what that finding said in a minute. The will hearing was scheduled for 60 days after Patricia filed the contest. Those 60 days were some of the most ordinary and most extraordinary of my life simultaneously. I went to school, I taught, I used my dad's phrase with my third graders, find the load-bearing wall, probably more often than I had any other year. I graded papers at the kitchen table at night, and sometimes I'd stop and just look at the mechanical pencil sitting on the table next to my coffee and think about the fact that the reason I had it was because a man who built bridges for 40 years understood that the tools you hand down matter more than the sentiment you attach to them. Gerald called me every couple of weeks. Not about the case, just to talk. He'd tell me stories about my dad I'd never heard, a particular job site in the late 80s, a disagreement with a contractor that became a 20-year friendship, the way Thomas always ordered the same thing at the same diner every Friday for 15 years because he said finding something that works and sticking with it was underrated as a life philosophy. I learned more about my father in those 60 days from Gerald than I had in years of Sunday calls, not because my dad had hidden anything, because Gerald remembered things my dad was too modest to tell me himself. The morning of the will hearing, I woke up at 5:15 and couldn't go back to sleep. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and read my dad's letter one more time. Not the whole thing, just the underlined line. I asked for you every day. I want you to know that. I put the letter back in the folder. I put the mechanical pencil in my coat pocket. I drove to the courthouse. Patricia met me outside. She had the kind of calm that comes from being very good at something and having prepared thoroughly and knowing the difference between those two things. And luck. The courtroom was not like what you see on television. It was a regular-sized room with regular-sized furniture and a judge who had clearly read the filings before she came in because she asked specific questions from the start and didn't need anything explained twice. Diane was there with her attorney. They sat across the room from Patricia and me. Gerald sat behind us in the gallery. Angela had submitted a written statement. Patricia had advised that her testimony in person wasn't necessary given the strength of the documentary record, and Angela had enough on her plate without taking another day off from work. Diane's attorney led with the obvious argument that Thomas Mitchell had signed the updated will voluntarily, that he was of sound mind, that no one had forced him to do anything. Patricia's response was precise and took about 11 minutes to deliver. She put the hospital records on the record first. The visitor list modification, timestamp, date, name of whoever requested the change. Not Thomas Mitchell, Diane Mitchell, on the same date as the first blocked Sunday call. That date put in the record clearly. She put my notes on the record next. 12 weeks of dated entries, what Diane said exactly, when she said it, cross-referenced with the hospital records for corroboration. She read Diane's text into the record. He is my husband, and I am doing what he has asked me to do. Then the letter. My dad's letter was authenticated through handwriting analysis. Patricia had arranged that before the hearing, and corroborated by Angela's written statement about how she received it and from whom. The letter was read into the record in full. When the reader got to, I asked for you every day. I want you to know that the courtroom was quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when something true has been said in them. Gerald, behind me, made a sound I won't describe because it was private to him. I reached back and put my hand on his arm for a second and then faced forward again. The argument Patricia made was not complicated. Thomas Mitchell signed a will that benefited Diane Mitchell during a period when Diane Mitchell had removed his daughter from his visitor list, intercepted communications between them, and told Thomas Mitchell that his daughter was choosing not to come. He was angry. His own letter confirmed he was angry. And his anger was based on a false premise manufactured by the primary beneficiary of the document he signed in that state of anger. That is undue influence. That is textbook undue influence, documented. The judge asked Diane's attorney 4 questions. They were good questions. The answers were not. She ruled from the bench the same afternoon. The updated will was declared invalid on grounds of undue influence. The original will, the one my dad had written before he married Diane, leaving his estate to me, was reinstated in full. The APS finding came 6 weeks after the hearing. The investigation produced a formal finding against Diane, not a criminal conviction, but a formal state determination of psychological abuse and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. That finding is public record, permanent. It disqualifies her from serving as a healthcare proxy or executor for any future patient or estate in South Carolina. I want to be clear about what a state finding like that means in practical terms, because I think it's worth understanding. It means the state of South Carolina conducted an independent investigation, reviewed the evidence, interviewed the parties, and formally determined that what Diane did met the legal definition of elder abuse. That is not a civil court deciding a financial dispute. That is the government saying, on the record, in writing, with her name attached, that she harmed a vulnerable person. The hospital responded to the patient rights complaint by instituting a new protocol requiring verbal confirmation from the patient, not just the healthcare proxy, before any visitor list modification for patients who are conscious and communicative. They did not admit wrongdoing publicly, but they changed the policy. The patient rights coordinator told me about it on a Tuesday morning, and I wrote it down in the same notes app I'd started the week Diane first answered my father's phone. The APS investigator, Marcus Webb, made a referral to the Greenville County Sheriff's Office for potential criminal investigation of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. That is a felony under South Carolina law. I want to be honest about where that stands because my dad raised me to never claim a measurement I hadn't actually taken. As of right now, criminal charges have not been filed. The investigation is ongoing. I don't know what comes next, and I'm not going to pretend I do. What I know is that the referral was made, that the investigation is real, and that the people conducting it have access to everything Patricia compiled and everything the APS investigation produced. What happens after that is not mine to predict. It's theirs to determine. I trust the process because the process has been honest with me so far. That's enough. I drove past the house on a Saturday in October. My dad's house. The one that's mine now once Diane vacates, which is 30 days from the hearing. The white clapboard on the north side needs repainting. The gutter on the east corner is pulling away from the fascia. He'd have noticed both of those 6 months ago. Gerald and I are going over on a Saturday in November to start going through his things. Gerald is bringing his truck. I'm bringing lunch. I found the recipe in my dad's handwriting tucked inside one of his engineering notebooks when I was going through the documents Patricia needed. A specific sandwich he used to make whenever they were working on something together. I didn't know he'd written it down. I photographed it with my phone, same as everything else, and then I just sat there for a while holding my phone looking at his handwriting on a recipe for a sandwich. He wrote everything down, of course he did. A measurement you don't write down is just a feeling. I wrote Angela a letter, handwritten. I used the mechanical pencil. I told her she was the load-bearing wall, that the whole structure held because of her, that my dad chose the right person to trust with the envelope, and I was grateful every day for the kind of person she turned out to be. She wrote back. 2 paragraphs. She said my dad was one of the most quietly dignified patients she had ever cared for, that he never complained, that he talked about me with the matter-of-fact pride of a man who considers his work a success and knows it. I keep her letter with his. Here is what actually happened, in order, the way my dad would have wanted it stated. Diane removed my name from my father's visitor list without his knowledge or consent. She intercepted our communications and told him I wasn't coming when I was trying every day to reach him. She used his resulting grief and anger, both of which she manufactured, to facilitate a will change that substantially benefited her. My father figured out something was wrong and left evidence with a nurse named Angela, who called me 3 days after the funeral. The evidence included his letter and a copy of the altered will. I documented everything from the first blocked Sunday call through the hearing. Patricia filed 3 legal actions. The will contest succeeded. Original will reinstated. The APS investigation produced a formal finding of elder abuse and financial exploitation, now on permanent public record. The hospital changed its visitor list protocol. A criminal referral was made, and that investigation is ongoing. Diane is vacating the house in 30 days. Gerald and I are going over in November. That is the whole thing, every load-bearing element in order. What I want to leave with you is simpler than the legal details. My dad spent his last 2 weeks trying to reach me through every path that was still open to him. He couldn't call me. That path was blocked. He couldn't ask for me directly and be believed. That path had been managed. So he found Angela. He wrote a letter, he left me a document, and told me to ask a lawyer to help me understand it. He couldn't fix what had been done, but he made sure I had what I needed to find the truth after he was gone. That is what fathers like him do. They don't waste the time they have on what they can't change. They spend it on what they can still give you. A tool, a phrase, a sealed envelope with your name on it in handwriting you'd recognize anywhere. If you are watching this and you have a parent who is aging or ill, please understand this. A healthcare proxy has enormous power. The person named as healthcare proxy controls access, controls information, controls the patient's contact with the outside world. That power is appropriate and necessary when it is used in good faith. When it is not used in good faith, it is one of the most effective tools for isolation that exists. Know who is named on those documents. Know whether that person's interests align with your parents' actual wishes. And if something feels structurally wrong, if the direct path keeps being blocked, if you're getting information through one person and only one person, and that information consistently keeps you at a distance, write it down, date it, keep the record. You may never need it, but if you do, it will be the most important thing you have. My dad left me a mechanical pencil that makes a line exactly as wide as you intend. He left me a phrase about load-bearing walls. He left me a sealed envelope with everything I needed. He asked for me every day. And now, because of what he left and because of what I did with it, the record reflects exactly what happened. Not what Diane wanted the record to say, what actually happened. A measurement doesn't care how you feel about it, neither does a court record. Tell me your first name and your city in the comments. Tell me if someone ever used your absence against you, built a story around the fact that you weren't there when you were trying everything you had to get there. And tell me if the truth came out anyway. For more stories like this one, we're on the channel. And I'll be honest with you, there are stories there that will stop you mid-scroll and make you think about your own family in ways you weren't expecting. The kind of stories that stay with you. If this one found you tonight, the others will too. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.